1950s, parents across the United States were convinced that a wave of teenage rebellion was rotting the moral fabric of the country. Juvenile delinquency was the headline of the day, and the nation was looking for a scapegoat. They blamed violent movies and the new sound of rock and roll. But the government saved its wrath for a much smaller target: lowly 10-cent comic books. The moral crusaders especially hated horror and crime stories, and no one made them better or bloodier than a man named Bill Gaines. As the head of EC Comics, Gaines became the public face of everything the establishment feared. In 1954, the U.S. Senate hauled him before a televised hearing, while local groups organized public bonfires of his books. But the real killing blow was a new industry-wide code designed specifically to make EC's titles illegal. They forced the most innovative publisher in America off the newsstands and into a shallow grave. But Gaines had planted a single seed they couldn't kill: a satirical magazine called Mad. It would grow into a cultural phenomenon, making Bill Gaines a multimillionaire and proving that his brand of subversion was exactly what the world wanted. Today, we're exploring the rise, the ruin, and the multi-million-dollar revenge of EC Comics, the publisher that was too subversive to stay buried. The EC legend doesn't begin with a visionary. It begins with a chemistry student who wanted to be literally anywhere else. In 1947, William Gaines was halfway through a degree at NYU with plans to become a high school chemistry teacher. He was intelligent, sensitive, and by his own admission, a bit of a bumbling idiot in the eyes of his father, Max Gaines. To the rest of the world, Max Gaines was a comic book titan. He was the man who quite literally invented the modern comic book format in the 1930s by folding Sunday newspaper funnies into a booklet. He had been a pioneer at All American Publications, the precursor to DC Comics, where he oversaw the creation of icons like Wonder Woman and Green Lantern. But by the late 40s, Max was running his own shop, Educational Comics. True to its name, Max's company focused on wholesome fare, picture stories from the Bible, American history, and science. They were books designed to be approved by parents and teachers. At home and in the office, Max was a man with a legendary temper. Max's constant refrain to his son was a stinging one: "You'll never amount to anything." Bill coped with his father's shadow by disappearing into his hobbies. He was an avid photographer and a dedicated science student, happier in a dark room or a lab than a boardroom. To Bill, the family business wasn't a legacy. It was a noisy, stressful place where he felt like a constant disappointment. When Max was suddenly killed in a speedboat accident that summer, Bill didn't rush to take the throne. He hated the comic book business. Max left his family not with a fortune, but with a sinking ship. Educational Comics was drowning in a staggering $100,000 of debt, nearly $1.5 million in today's money. It was Bill's mother, Jessie, who became the unlikely catalyst for the EC revolution. Fearing total financial ruin, she begged and essentially forced Bill to take the helm. Out of a sense of filial duty and the looming threat of bankruptcy, the reluctant scientist put away his test tubes and sat behind his father's desk on the 7th floor of 225 Lafayette Street. At first, it was a disaster. Bill only visited the office once a week, doing the bare minimum to sign payroll checks. The turning point came when a young, ambitious artist named Al Feldstein walked into the office. Feldstein's portfolio wasn't full of saints or school teachers. It was full of good girl art, women with, as Bill put it, very big boobs and very short skirts. Bill thought they were the cat's meow. He kept the EC initials, but he dropped the educational and replaced it with entertaining. He realized that if he wanted to save the family business, he had to stop trying to please his father's ghost and start pleasing the newsstands. He wasn't a bumbling idiot after all. With Al Feldstein by his side, Bill Gaines stopped trying to follow his father's map and started following his own instincts. The result was a creative explosion the industry wasn't prepared for, known as the new trend. In 1950, EC unleashed a trio of titles that redefined the newsstand: The Crypt of Terror, renamed Tales from the Crypt with issue 20, The Vault of Horror, and The Haunt of Fear. But the new trend wasn't just about gore. It was a radical shift in how a comic book company was run. At a time when other publishers treated artists as anonymous assembly line workers, Bill Gaines and his editors, Al Feldstein and Harvey Kurtzman, turned them into superstars. They were encouraged to develop distinctive personal styles and, most importantly, they were allowed to sign their work. It was a level of creative respect that would later influence comic industry giants like Stan Lee. EC's stable of incredibly talented artists included Graham Ingalls. Nicknamed Ghastly, his style was defined by rotting textures, melting shadows, and a sense of decaying atmosphere. Wally Wood. A master of cluttered perfection, he filled every inch of his sci-fi landscapes with incredible detail, sleek machinery, and cinematic lighting. Jack Davis. Davis brought a frantic, high-energy line to the page, blending gritty realism with the rubbery, expressive character work that would later define Mad Magazine. Johnny Craig, the clean master of the group, Craig relied on sharp noir compositions and an understated elegance that made his dark subject matter feel dangerously real. And Al Feldstein himself. Feldstein used bold, heavy inks and a cinematic sense of framing to create punchy, high-contrast covers that popped off the newsstands. The face of this new era was a trio of iconic horror hosts known collectively as the Ghoul Lunatics. These weren't just narrators, they were the brand's irreverent mascots. They included the Crypt Keeper, the Vault Keeper, and the Old Witch. They would appear in the very first panel, mocking the audience with gruesome puns and greeting readers as boils and ghouls. By the early 50s, EC was a powerhouse. Across their whole line, they were printing between 2 and 2.5 million books a month. While these numbers were impressive, Gaines was a realist. He knew he wasn't outselling Superman, which moved nearly double that. But EC had something the Caped Crusaders didn't, a level of provocative sophistication that was starting to make the wrong people very nervous. The new trend was about to collide head-on with a wave of moral panic that would shatter the industry's independence for a generation.
The real question is this: are comic books good or are they not good?
The mid-1950s was an era of profound American anxiety. Under the long shadow of the Cold War, conformity was at a premium, and parents were terrified that their children were starting to rebel. They needed a scapegoat to explain this shift, and they found their expert witness in a German-born psychiatrist named Dr. Frederick Wertham. In 1954, Wertham published a book that would become the blueprint for the comic industry's destruction, Seduction of the Innocent. His most explosive claim was that the comic book industry was practicing a form of mass conditioning even more dangerous than Nazi propaganda. He famously testified that, quote, Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry. They get the children much younger. Wertham argued that EC's stories were blueprints for crime, providing kids with literal techniques for theft and assault, while creating a mental atmosphere of cruelty that poisoned their development. The cultural pressure became so intense that it reached the highest levels of government. In April 1954, the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency opened a series of televised hearings. Bill Gaines was about to step into the witness chair. He was walking into a trap designed to silence the Ghoul Lunatics forever.
My name is William Gaines. I am a comic magazine publisher.
On April 21st, 1954, Bill Gaines walked into a room that was designed to be his professional gallows. He appeared voluntarily, determined to counter the testimony of Dr. Frederick Wertham and defend the medium he loved. Gaines was battling a severe cold and extreme sleep deprivation after pulling an all-nighter to draft his statement. To stay sharp, he had taken Dexedrine, a diet medication his doctor had prescribed. Gaines wasn't called to the stand until 3 p.m. By then, the stimulant was wearing off. As the questioning began, he felt himself, quote, fading away. He was sluggish, dazed, and as he later described it, it was as if the senators were, quote, whacking a corpse. Gaines's opening argument was quite sophisticated. He insisted that American children were bright enough to know the difference between a story and a crime.
We think our children so evil, so vicious, so simple-minded, that it takes but a comic magazine story of murder to set them to murder, of robbery to set them to robbery.
But then, Senator Estes Kefauver reached for a copy of Crime Suspense Stories number 22. The cover featured a Johnny Craig illustration of a man holding a bloody axe and the severed head of a blonde woman.
Here seems to be your May 22nd issue, and here seems to be a man with a bloody axe holding a woman's head up, which has been severed from her body.
Kefauver looked at the image, then looked at Gaines and asked a simple, devastating question.
Do you think that's in good taste?
In a moment that would haunt the industry for decades, Gaines replied,
Yes, sir, I do. For the cover of a horror comic.
To the senators and the television cameras, he looked like a merchant of gore who had lost his moral compass. The fallout was immediate. The next day, the New York Times ran a front-page headline that practically sealed EC's fate. No harm in horror, comics issuer says. Terrified of federal censorship, the rest of the industry scrambled to form the Comics Code Authority. This wasn't a governmental law, it was a self-imposed industry cartel. The publishers realized that if they didn't police themselves, the Senate would do it for them. So they created a seal of approval and made a deal with the nation's magazine distributors. If a book didn't carry that seal, it didn't get on the trucks. For Bill Gaines, this was a death sentence. While they didn't name EC specifically, they drafted a set of rules that acted as a direct strike against Bill Gaines' business. The code banned the words horror and terror. It prohibited any depiction of vampires, werewolves, and the Walking Dead. Bill Gaines saw his new trend empire choked out of existence in a matter of months. But as the comics were being cleared from the shelves, Gaines had one final card to play, a single title that didn't need to be a comic book to survive. By 1955, Bill Gaines was a man without an empire. The Comics Code had effectively executed the new trend, but the code had a flaw. It only had power over comic books. During the chaos of the hearings, Harvey Kurtzman had been pressuring Gaines to turn their satirical title, Mad, into a full-sized magazine. By switching to a magazine format, Mad escaped the jurisdiction of the Comics Code Authority entirely. It was a masterstroke. Free from the good taste censors, Mad became a cultural phenomenon and the definitive voice of American satire for the next half-century. As the decades passed, the irony of the 1954 hearings became clear. The very men who tried to suppress Gaines's trash saw their own influence vanish, while the bumbling chemistry student became a multimillionaire. The books that were once tossed into sidewalk bonfires became some of the most sought-after artifacts in pop culture history. Today, collectors pay thousands for original EC issues.
Do I hear $75? Do I hear $80,000?
The original artwork, the pages created by the superstars Gaines championed, now commands prices that reflect its true impact on American art. In June 2021, Wally Wood's cover for Shock Suspense Stories No. 6 sold at auction for a staggering $840,000. At the time, it set the world record as the most expensive work of original American comic book cover art. In his later years, Bill Gaines looked nothing like the stressed-out witness from 1954. He leaned into his Mad King persona, growing a long white beard, wearing mismatched clothes, and presiding over a staff known as the Usual Gang of Idiots, with a sense of joy and creative freedom his father never knew. Max Gaines had told his son he would never amount to anything. But by the time Bill passed away in 1992, he had done something every bit as significant as inventing the comic book. He had defended the right to be subversive. He had turned bad taste into a lasting legacy that would directly influence a new generation of American masters, from the horror of Stephen King to the cinematic world-building of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Bill Gaines proved that you can bury a good story, but it has a funny way of rising from the grave. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment and tell me which EC title would have been on your nightstand in 1954. If you enjoyed this, give this video a like, and I'll see you next time.